Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I am going to share with you guys a handful of books that wound up really surprising me. I never go into books thinking that I'm not going to like them. Whenever I have a book on my TBR that I start to lose interest in, I take it off my TBR, I don't read it. That being said, most of the time, being as harsh of a critic as I am, I go into books thinking that most likely I'm just gonna think the book is all right. But it's very unlikely, I know it's very unlikely that most books are gonna wind up being one of my all-time favorite books. So today I just wanna share with you guys, I think I've got maybe 6 or 7 or 8, something like that, books that I went into thinking this will be all right, this will be a good time, and I ended up absolutely loving. So let's get into it. So the first book that I want to mention is Cersei by Madeline Miller. This, obviously, I got this book whenever I was still a Book of the Month member. This was from April 2018, though this was actually before I even knew what BookTube was. My interest in Book of the Month books had been waning at the time that I got this book. I got to the point where I would just look up all the books that they were offering and just get whatever had the highest ratings because nothing really was calling my name. And honestly, that was kind of true of Cersei. It had the highest rating. So I was like, okay, I'll give this a shot. And you know, it's a Greek retelling, and I had never read a Greek retelling before. Although I do find it interesting. I mean, it's not anything that I've like seriously researched or anything, but I do find it interesting. So I thought I'll just give this a shot, and didn't have the highest expectations of it. But this was awesome. Obviously now, since that point in time, I've discovered that this is a very, very well-loved book. One of the main reasons that I enjoyed this book so much was the writing style. I just really enjoyed, I really enjoyed the beauty of it, and it has this sort of, almost this kind of dreamy quality to it that I really, really liked. I think that Greek gods and goddesses are a really interesting subject. They tend to have this sort of be kind of morally gray almost. And the storyline itself, I thought was really compelling. So I think I ended up giving this maybe 4.5 stars. Yeah, so this was, I assumed I'd go into it and maybe give it 3 stars, but it did a whole lot better than that for me. Next up, we have got A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman, which this is the story about a young couple. It's really kind of a coming-age story. This young couple that goes on a date. They go out in a rowboat on this lake and end up finding this house that is inside the lake, down at the bottom of the lake. They can see it. They can look down and see it. And it's about them exploring, really it's about them exploring that house, but also about them kind of slowly falling in love, which, interestingly enough, I tend to really not like that. It's not something that, yeah, that's just not something that I am drawn to at all. And this book also, I really didn't think I would like this because the ratings on it are very low. It has like I think a 3.2 or 3.3 average rating. I assumed it was most likely I probably wasn't going to enjoy it either, but I absolutely loved this book. Upon finishing this book, I definitely understood why it was that most people don't really like it and why I did. And 2 reasons really. One of them is I think people expect it to be in a genre that it's not. It's really kind of a fusion, but also it has a strange ending that I don't think is the type of ending that the average reader really enjoys. It's pretty open. A lot of weird stuff happens in this book, and it's not really explained that much or at all. I am of the unpopular opinion that open endings are great. I love them. I think it takes a lot of courage for an author to just leave a book open-ended like that. So it really worked for me. This is a very atmospheric book. I was absolutely hooked from the first page. So yeah, this was a very big surprise for me. Another very surprising book for me was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is also a Book of the Month book. It's like a supernatural thriller, kind of a horror thriller. And you know, I used to read thrillers a whole lot more. Tell me if you're like this or if you've noticed this as well. The more thrillers that I read, the more it sort of felt like you've read one, you've read them all. But this, I really, really enjoyed this book. I think the main reason that I like this book so much is because it really leaned into the supernatural heavily. Like, it didn't shy away from that. I feel like sometimes in like supernatural type thrillers, it's very common for it to just be like, you know, oh, and it was a drippy faucet after all, or whatever. This book didn't do that. Like, it completely plunged headlong into the supernatural. Also, the storyline was really exciting. I just could not put it down. So this, I think I probably gave this a 4-star, which for me, for a thriller, that is pretty dang good. I need to pick up another book by this author, if that is, you know, if that's how her books usually are. I don't know. Tell me if you're a fan of Simone St. James, if I should pick up another book of hers and which one, or if this is just kind of a one-shot deal and nothing else is held up to it. Tell me that as well. I'd like to know. Another book that really surprised me was The Long Walk by Stephen King. This is it's kind of hard to classify what the genre is. I think it's a little bit of a fusion. It's not typical for Stephen King. This book is actually fairly well loved on BookTube. I don't know that I've really heard anyone bash it, but still, not a lot happens in this book. I tend to prefer books that have a lot of action. This one just doesn't. But what it lacked in action, it made up for in tension tenfold. It's just the story of this group of boys, which I think they're maybe like 15-ish years old, if I remember correctly, and they're just walking. They have to walk at a certain speed and they cannot stop for any reason. They can't stop to eat, to go to the bathroom, to sleep. It's them, their thoughts, them talking to each other, and that's it. That's the entire plot, which, trust me, that will not ruin it for you, because this book doesn't hinge on plot. It hinges on emotion and tension. You get so wrapped up in just sort of the insanity of the situation. It's a very disturbing book in a lot of ways, because you get so invested with these characters and their fear and their thoughts and their emotions. Yeah, so I can definitely understand why people love this book now. It was a huge surprise to me. But yeah, I ended up loving The Long Walk. The next book that I want to mention, or books I should say, this is actually a series, and it is the Wayward Pines trilogy by Blake Crouch. Well, I'll just talk about Pines, the first book. The main reason I didn't have the highest of hopes for this book when I picked it up was one of my favorite books before I picked up before I picked up Pines was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which I had read Dark Matter and Recursion by Blake Crouch. Which, by the way, I agree with everyone when they say whichever one you read first, you will prefer between Dark Matter and Recursion. I completely agree with that. Dark Matter, I absolutely loved Dark Matter. And Recursion, I thought was okay. And just kind of assumed going into Pines that I would also think it was okay, because I loved Dark Matter so much that I sort of had this lightning doesn't strike twice sort of mindset with it. So I figured it would be kind of the same thing for me. Like, I would think it was okay. But that series is absolutely amazing. You have to suspend your disbelief a little bit on it, for sure. But if you can do that, it is a ride. It is so much fun. It has a lot of tropes that I really, really enjoy. It just kept me on the edge of my seat. Made me feel very much like, what on earth is going on? Judging by the synopsis going into it, I didn't realize it was going to be that type of book. And that's really my favorite kind of book to read. And even now, though, I still have this feeling of like, will I ever enjoy another Blake Crouch book again? I don't know. Tell me if you're like that at all. Like, if you read a really, really good book by an author, do you have that fear of like, nothing I read by them will ever be as good ever again? If you haven't read Wayward Pines and you really like that aspect of some books, like the disorientation of not knowing what is going on and just kind of figuring it out a little by little as you go, I would definitely recommend that you give that trilogy a shot. Another book that wound up being really surprising for me was Paradox Bound by Peter Clines. When I got this book, I had never heard of it. And I think even since reading this, which I read it last year, I think, I haven't really heard many people talk about it. I think I've heard a couple booktubers just mention it and say they might read it, and that's about it. I haven't really heard a lot of people talking about it. So if you haven't heard anything about it, you just kind of assume that there's a reason for that it's okay at best. But I found the synopsis really compelling. It's a time travel story, and it has a lot of kind of cat and mouse, like characters that are being followed and chased, and I really like that kind of stuff in books. So I gave it a shot and ended up really enjoying this book. It was just so much fun. This was a really fun book. This is the kind of book that it's a very easy read, and it's really appeals to, like, if you really are into escapism, reading for escapism, this really appeals to that. I think it's an easy read. It's fun to read. It's very high action, very fast paced. The characters they're likable, and there's two protagonists who have a really interesting kind of dynamic between them that I really enjoyed. I don't think this is any sort of like literary masterpiece or particularly thematically rich by any stretch of the imagination, but it is just fun. I don't do a lot of rereads, but this was so much fun. I can definitely imagine that one day, whenever I'm just kind of wanting to read for a little bit of escapism, this is absolutely a book that I would read again. Okay, let's take this down a notch. The next book on my list is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is not what I would call a fun book. This is an absolutely terrifying dystopian novel, and it's kind of a modern classic. This is the story of the US government basically turning into this totalitarian type of government that is based around these bizarre sort of religious ideas, I guess. And it follows a woman she is turned into a handmaid. Women that are known to be capable of childbearing are given to these wealthy families that don't have children in order to basically impregnate them and have them produce a child for this family. The main reason I didn't think that I was really going to enjoy this book is because I knew that it had more of a literary style to it. I sort of assumed that it was going to be really kind of dense and not very accessible for the average reader. I consider myself a pretty average reader. I read for fun and enjoyment. I'm not reading to like grow and learn and enhance or anything like that. I am a anxious person. I am a sometimes depressed person. And so whenever I read, I just want something that is fun and makes me feel good. And this really isn't the kind of book that makes you feel like good. That being said, I thought this book was fantastic. I honestly should have had some idea that I was going to wind up enjoying this book because I really love dystopian and utopian stories. Though it was absolutely horrifying, like conceptually, I found it to be so well conceived. Like there is a very good reason that Margaret Atwood has the kind of literary accolades that she does. She's an excellent writer. I was instantly sucked into this book, and it absolutely worked for me. It's hard to take, but I love this book, and I'm still surprised that I loved it as much as I did, honestly. The final book on my list is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is a YA fantasy. It has more of like an urban fantasy kind of feel to it. I don't know. Talk to me down below. Tell me if you've read this, how genre-wise, how you would classify this story. This is it's a heist story. I read the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which I thought was pretty okay. At this point, I don't even know why I decided to pick this up, because by the time I finished the Shadow and Bone trilogy, I was super burnt out on the Grishaverse, but I decided to read this anyway and ended up absolutely loving it. The main reason that I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to absolutely love this book is because of the angst that I knew was present in this book. It's a YA novel, and that's not to say not all YA novels are super angsty, but a lot of times they are. That is not uncommon. I'm too far past that in my life to really be all that interested in reading about like teenager angstiness. It was not an intolerable amount by any stretch of the imagination. And for the small amount of angst in this book that there was, what more than made up for it was just the concept and the storyline. It was very gripping to me. When there's a lot hanging over a character's head, it can stress me out a little bit. And I mean, that's what a heist is. It's like if you get caught, you could get in a whole lot of trouble, and that tends to really stress me out. But this book didn't. This book was just the right amount of stress for me in that way. It was enough to like keep me really invested and keep me wanting to turn the pages, but not so much that it detracted from my overall enjoyment of the book. I also really enjoyed the characters. I feel like they were developed well, like I got to know them well and got really interested and invested in their lives. Yeah, this was just really a fun book. I get why it's as popular as it is. I have the second book, whatever it's called. What is it called? Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. Crooked King. I have Crooked Kingdom. I need to continue with it. I need to make the second one a priority, but yeah, Six of Crows, well-loved book with good reason. Hey, Lauren from 5 Hours in the Future here. I did not realize when I filmed earlier that I completely forgot to record an outro. So here we are. Sorry about that. Hopefully this will do. Thank you for hanging out with me while I talked about a handful of books that I found really surprising in a good way. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.